It started with the dust, a thin plume on the horizon rising against a pale Arizona sky. Hannah Lee saw it from the corral, hammer in her hand. In this part of the territory in the spring of 1885, dust meant one of two things: trouble or more trouble. She wasn't a woman who waited to find out which. She set the hammer down, the sound a dull thud in the vast quiet. Her hand went to the Winchester propped against the fence post. The wood was smooth and familiar, the metal cool against her skin. It was the only real friend she'd had since her father passed the year before. The dust grew, resolving itself into a shape. A horse, a rider, coming straight for her gate. Her gut tightened into a cold knot. Folks in town told her to sell, to head back east where a woman alone wouldn't have to greet visitors with a rifle in her hands. But this land, this scrub, this silence, it was hers, and she'd defend it. The rider slowed, pulling his dun-colored mare to a stop a good 30 feet away. He sat tall in the saddle, a silhouette carved against the harsh morning light. He lifted one hand, palm out, a gesture of peace. Hannah didn't move. Peace was a rare commodity out here. He was built like he was hewn from the rock of the surrounding mesas. Broad shoulders, arms corded with muscle, skin the color of burnished copper. His hair was long, black, and thick, braided over one shoulder with a single raven feather tied near the end. Apache. The thought was instant, a reflex born of stories and warnings. "Good morning," he said. His voice was deep, carrying on the dry wind. It was calm, but it held a weight that made the air feel heavy. Hannah kept the Winchester angled across her body, not pointing at him, not yet, but ready. "You're on private land." "I know," he replied, his eyes scanning the property. Not like a man admiring the view, but like a man assessing fortifications. "Name is Jace Tacoma. I saw the smoke from your chimney. Figured I'd see if there was trouble." Her gaze flicked from his face to the long knife sheathed at his belt, then to his horse. It was lean but well cared for. A man who cared for his horse might not be looking for a fight. But that knife, it had seen use. "No trouble here," she said, her voice flat. "And I'm not expecting company." "Not looking for trouble," he said, his eyes meeting hers. They were dark, steady. They didn't waver. "Lost a shoe on my mare 2 days back. I've been on the trail without a warm meal since. Thought maybe I could trade some work for something hot." It was a common story. Drifters, wanderers, men with nothing but the clothes on their backs. She'd turned away a dozen just like him. Another mouth to feed was a liability she couldn't afford. But there was something in his stillness, an absence of the nervous energy she saw in most men on the road. "What kind of work?" she asked, her grip on the rifle still tight. He nodded toward the fence she'd been mending. "That break, it could use a brace rail. The way you're setting it, the next strong wind will have it down again." He was right. She knew he was right. She'd been alone for a year, and every chore took twice the time with half the strength. The place was slowly fraying at the edges, just like she was. Still, letting a stranger inside her fences? It was a risk, a big one. But then he said something that changed everything. He looked past her, toward the small cabin, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That chimney of yours," he said, his voice dropping a little lower. "The smoke's coming out thin. You're burning mesquite. But the stones at the base, they're sweating." Hannah froze. How could he possibly know that? The chimney had been weeping mortar for weeks, a problem she hadn't known how to fix. "The ground here is damp," Jace continued, his gaze sweeping the yard. "Deeper than it should be. You've got a spring running under this property, a strong one." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her father had always said their well was fed by a secret spring, one that never ran dry, even in the worst droughts. It was their one true treasure, the reason this patch of land was worth fighting for. No one else knew. No one. How did he know? "You can water your horse at the trough," she said, her voice tight. The decision was made. She had to know more. She had to know what this man was. "I've got beans on the stove." Jace gave a single, slow nod. "Thank you." He dismounted, and on the ground he was even taller, broader. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that was unnerving. Every step was placed with purpose. He led his mare to the trough, but he didn't just let her drink. He watched her, murmuring in a language Hannah didn't recognize, his hand resting on the animal's neck. Inside, the cabin felt small and fragile. She ladled beans into a tin bowl and set it on the rough-hewn table, pushing it toward the far end. She kept the Winchester within arm's reach. When he stepped inside, the doorway seemed to shrink around him. He took off his thin leather gloves, revealing hands that were calloused and scarred, but his movements were careful. He didn't sit right away. He stood for a moment, his dark eyes taking in the room, the patch quilt on her cot, the single faded photograph of her parents on the mantel. He ate slowly, methodically, not like a starving man, but like a man who respected the food, who knew what it cost. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. "You've been alone here long?" he asked, his voice even. "Since last March," she said. "My pa passed." Jace paused, his spoon hovering over the bowl. "That's hard." "The land doesn't stop needing work just because you're on your own," she said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "No," he agreed softly. "It doesn't." When he finished, he didn't just push the bowl aside. He placed it neatly at the edge of the table, perfectly aligned with the grain of the wood. A man of precision, a man of control. "Let me see to that fence," he said. By late afternoon, the fence wasn't just mended. It was fortified. He'd cut and set a brace rail exactly as he'd described, sinking it deep into the earth. Then, without being asked, he'd checked the barn roof for leaks and tightened the sagging wire on the chicken run. He worked with an economy of motion she'd never seen before. No wasted steps, no wasted swings of the hammer. Each action flowed into the next. She watched him from the porch, pretending to mend a feed sack. She saw the way the muscles in his back and arms coiled and released, a display of effortless power. But it was his eyes that held her attention. He was working, yes, but he was also watching, constantly scanning the horizon, the road, the low-lying hills. He wasn't just a drifter looking for a meal. He was a man waiting for something, or hiding from someone. As the sun began to dip, casting long, dramatic shadows across the yard, he led his horse toward the lean-to shed. "I'll bed down here," he said, not asking for permission, but stating a fact. "If you've got an old blanket, I can make do." She fetched one of her father's old trail blankets, worn soft with use. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed. His skin was warm, his touch surprisingly gentle. A jolt went through her, unexpected and sharp. "You moving on tomorrow?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. "That's the plan," he said, his gaze holding hers. "Unless you've got more work." The words hung in the cooling air. She should say yes. She should tell him to leave. The risk was too great. But the fence was solid for the first time in years. The chicken run was secure. And that chimney? "I've got a roof needs patching," she heard herself say. "And a chimney. You fix those, I'll see you fed another day." Jace gave that same small, single nod. It wasn't just an agreement. It felt like a pact. "All right." He turned and walked toward the shed. Hannah watched him go, the rifle suddenly feeling heavy in her hands. She told herself it was just about the work. A fair trade. Labor for food. But as she watched him disappear into the shadows of the shed, a chilling thought struck her. The way he scanned the horizon, the way he noticed the secret spring, the way he moved like a hunter. Maybe he hadn't found her by chance at all. Maybe he had been looking for this exact piece of land. The next morning, Jace was up before the sun, already checking the posts along the north fence line when she came out with her coffee. He moved with a restless energy, as if sleep were a luxury he couldn't afford. He patched the barn roof before the morning was half over, his hammer blows echoing in a steady, powerful rhythm. Then he moved on to the chimney. He didn't just patch the mortar, he dismantled the top 3 courses of stone, cleaned each one, and rebuilt it, his hands working with the precision of a master mason. Hannah found herself making excuses to be outside just to watch him. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve. He spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. He was a man who knew how to build, how to fix, how to fortify. But why was he here? Why her homestead? The question gnawed at her. Late in the day, the answer came rattling up the road in a dusty wagon. She knew the sound of that squeaky axle before she even saw it. Tom Keeley, her nearest neighbor, a man whose face was permanently soured by suspicion and cheap whiskey. He reined in his horses at her gate, his piggy eyes taking in the yard, the mended fence, the rebuilt chimney. His gaze landed on Jace, who was splitting firewood with a fluid, terrifying efficiency. "Well now, Hannah," Keely called out, a smirk twisting his lips. "Didn't expect to see you keeping company." His eyes raked over Jace with open contempt. "Just getting some work done, Tom," Hannah replied, her tone as level as she could make it. Keely spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust, dangerously close to her fence. "Work, is it? With him?" He jerked his chin toward Jace. "You know who that is? You know what he is?" Jace didn't stop splitting the wood. The axe rose and fell, splitting logs in a single clean stroke. But Hannah saw his shoulders tense. She saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. "He's a hired hand, Tom. Nothing more," she said, stepping closer to the gate. Keely laughed, a nasty, grating sound. "Hired hand? That man is Jace Tacoma. He was an Army scout. Or he was, until he showed his true colors at Willow Creek." Willow Creek. The name meant nothing to Hannah, but the venom in Keely's voice made her blood run cold. "He's a traitor, girl," Keely sneered. "A turncoat who got good men killed. My own cousin was one of them. There's folks who'd pay a high price to know where he is. A very high price." The axe stopped mid-swing. Jace stood perfectly still, his back to them. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the buzzing of flies and the pounding of Hannah's own heart. A traitor, a wanted man, with a price on his head, and he was on her land. He was sleeping in her shed. He knew her secret. Keely's eyes narrowed, a cruel glint appearing in them. "You best be careful, Hannah. Company like that, it gets a lone woman killed. If I were you, I'd send him on his way. Or better yet, I'd send a message to the marshal in Benson. Let him know what washed up on your doorstep." He snapped the reins, the wagon lurching forward, leaving a cloud of dust and menace hanging in the air. Hannah stood frozen, the world tilting on its axis. She turned to look at Jace. He had slowly lowered the axe, his knuckles white where he gripped the handle. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes like chips of obsidian. He didn't deny it. He didn't offer an explanation. "You should have told me," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Would you have believed me?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "He said people would pay to know where you are," she pressed, her fear turning to anger. "Are they coming here? Are you bringing trouble to my door?" "Trouble was already coming for you, Hannah," he said, and the way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. "You just didn't know it yet." What did that mean? He took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Keely isn't just a bitter neighbor. His family has been trying to buy this land for years, haven't they?" She nodded numbly. It was true. The Keelys had tried to pressure her father, then her after he died. They wanted the water. "They think the spring is on their property line," Jace continued, his voice hardening. "They've been damming the creek upstream, trying to choke you out. But they don't know the truth. They don't know the source is right here, under your house." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But now I know, and that makes me a problem for them." It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Keely's visit wasn't just a neighborly warning, it was a threat. He wasn't just warning her about Jace, he was warning her about what would happen if she sided with him. "And this story about Willow Creek?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Is it true?" Jace looked away toward the mountains, his jaw tight. "Truth is a matter of who's telling it," he said, the same words he would use later. But this time they offered no comfort. That night she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of wind in the mesquite, sounded like approaching footsteps. The man sleeping just yards away was a walking powder keg, and Keely had just lit the fuse. He wasn't just a hired hand. He was a fugitive, a target, and by helping him, she had just painted a target on her own back. She lay awake for hours, the Winchester on the cot beside her. She could tell him to leave at sunrise, send him on his way, and hope Keely believed she had nothing to do with him. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. But as dawn approached, another thought crept in. Jace hadn't just fixed her fence. He had fortified it. He hadn't just patched her roof. He had made it stronger. He hadn't just noticed her spring. He understood its value, its danger. His every action since arriving hadn't been the work of a simple drifter. It had been the work of a soldier preparing a defensive position. He wasn't just hiding here, he was getting ready for a fight. And maybe, just maybe, he thought she was worth fighting for. The next morning, she didn't tell him to leave. Instead, when she stepped outside with 2 mugs of coffee, she found him not in the shed, but by the shallow riverbed that marked her property line, staring intently at the ground. He was tracing lines in the dirt with a stick. "Planting a garden?" she asked, handing him a mug. He took it without looking up. "The river is low," he said. "Too low for this time of year." He pointed with the stick. "See there? Where the bank is shored up with those rocks? That's not natural. Someone's been trying to divert the water flow. Upstream. Keely, it had to be." "And here," Jace continued, moving further down the line, "the mesquite trees. They're blooming early. The bees are frantic." He looked up at her, his eyes intense. "Nature is telling a story, Hannah, of a season that's off balance, of something that's wrong." He was seeing things she'd looked at her whole life but had never truly seen. He read the land like a book. "Come on," he said abruptly, heading back toward the horses. "I want to show you something." She hesitated for only a moment. She knew she should be afraid, but a different feeling was starting to take root. Curiosity, and something else, something she couldn't name. She saddled her horse and followed him. He led her not toward the town or the mountains, but down into the wash, following the curve of the San Pedro. He pointed out plants, telling her their names in the Apache tongue, explaining their uses. Yarrow for staunching blood, prickly pear for water, roots that could be ground into flour. It was a language of survival she had never known. They came to a thick grove of mesquite trees, their branches heavy with pale yellow blossoms, the air humming with the sound of thousands of bees. It was beautiful, a hidden pocket of life in the harsh landscape. He dismounted and tied their horses, redoing her knot with a quick, efficient movement. "That won't hold anything," he'd murmured, his fingers brushing hers. Again that jolt, like lightning on a summer night. They walked beneath the canopy of flowers, the sunlight filtering down in shifting patterns. The world felt different in here, quieter, safer. "My grandfather taught me to listen here," Jace said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "He said the trees hold the stories of the people. The bees carry the whispers of the seasons." He reached up and plucked a small cluster of blossoms, handing them to her. They were soft and fragrant. "It feels like spring is apologizing for the winter," she said, the words surprising her. He gave her a long, searching look. "You always talk like that? Like you see more than what's in front of you?" She shrugged, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. "Maybe I just learned to look harder. Out here, you have to." The air grew thick between them. The hum of the bees seemed to fade, replaced by the thrumming of her own blood in her ears. Something was about to happen. A line was about to be crossed. And in that moment, she decided to be the one to cross it. "I've never been kissed," she said. The words came out in a rush. A quiet confession dropped into the heart of the grove. She expected him to laugh, or pity her, or worse, to take what she was offering without a thought. But Jace did none of those things. His eyes, dark and serious, held hers. He didn't move forward, didn't reach for her. A profound stillness settled over him. "Let's start slow," he said, his voice a low rumble. Her breath caught in her throat. "I wouldn't know how." "You don't have to know anything," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not here to rush you." And that was it. The moment passed, but it left an indelible mark. It was a promise of patience, of respect. It was more intimate than any kiss could have been, but the peace of the grove was not meant to last. As they rode back toward the homestead, the world came crashing in again. 3 riders appeared on the road ahead. They weren't cowboys. They were traders by the look of them, their horses laden with packs. The man in the lead, who wore a flashy red sash at his waist, raised a hand. "Tacoma," he called out, a wide, predatory smile splitting his face. "Still wandering? I heard the army had you pinned down near the dragoons." Jace reined in his horse, his body going rigid. The easy calm he'd worn in the grove vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. "Working, Vargas," he said, his voice flat. Vargas's eyes slid over to Hannah, lingering for a moment too long, making her skin crawl. Then his gaze snapped back to Jace. Strange work for a man the army once called friend, he sneered, his smile widening. And then traitor. There it was again. That word. Traitor. Hannah felt the air crackle with tension. This was different from Keely's drunken accusations. This was something colder, more dangerous. Vargas looked at Jace not with hatred, but with a kind of professional interest, like a wolf sizing up its prey. Safe travels, Vargas, Jace said, his voice a low warning. He nudged his horse forward, trying to move past them, but Vargas blocked their path. Not so fast. There's a new bounty out for you, Tacoma, from a private source. A man who lost family at Willow Creek. Says you were responsible. He leaned forward in his saddle. It's a lot of money. Enough to make a man careless. The threat was unmistakable. Vargas wasn't just passing through. He was hunting. Get out of my way, Jace said, his hand moving almost imperceptibly toward the knife at his belt. Vargas chuckled. Always so serious. Fine. For now. He backed his horse away, but his eyes were locked on Jace. But the desert is a small place, my friend, and money spends the same everywhere. The traders moved on, their laughter echoing back at them. Hannah waited until they were out of earshot, her heart pounding. A bounty? He's a bounty hunter? He's whatever pays, Jace said, his jaw so tight it looked like it was carved from stone. Smuggler, trader, hunter, it doesn't matter. And the bounty is from Keely? Jace nodded once. Or his family. It's the same thing. They rode the rest of the way in a heavy silence. The quiet beauty of the grove felt like a distant memory, a dream from another life. The reality was this. They were trapped. Keely was poisoning the town against them, and now he'd hired men like Vargas to hunt Jace down. The homestead wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a cage. That night the storm broke. It came on fast, a wall of black cloud rolling over the mountains, the wind howling like a hungry animal. It wasn't just a storm, it felt like an omen. The sky cracked open, and rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. Jace was out in the pasture, checking the fence line along the rising river. Hannah watched from the cabin door as he rode hard against the wind, a lone, dark figure battling the elements. He was trying to protect the borders of their world, but she knew, with a sickening certainty, that the real storm wasn't the one in the sky. It was coming for them on the ground. He burst into the cabin moments later, soaked to the skin, his hair plastered to his face. The river's breaking its banks, he shouted over the roar of the thunder. The low pasture is going under. If it keeps up, it'll take the north fence with it. Lightning lit up the room, and in that split second, she saw the grim look on his face. This wasn't just about a fence. The wash, she said, her mind racing. The water will run straight for the cabin. Worse, he said, grabbing an old oilskin coat. It will make the road impassable, but it will also cover their tracks. Their tracks. Keely. Vargas. The storm wasn't a hindrance to them. It was cover. We need to dig a trench, he said, his voice urgent. Redirect the flow away from the house, now, while the ground is soft. They plunged back out into the maelstrom, armed with shovels. The wind tore at them, the rain stinging their faces like needles. They dug side by side, their movements frantic, desperate. Mud and water soaked them, but they didn't stop. The rhythm of the shovels became a frantic drumbeat against the thunder. Hannah's arms ached, her lungs burned, but she kept digging, matching Jace's pace. In the chaos of the storm, a strange clarity came to her. This was it. This was the choice. She wasn't just digging a trench to save her cabin. She was digging in. She was choosing her side. Then her shovel struck something hard. Not a rock. It made a dull metallic thud. What is it? Jace yelled over the wind. She scraped away the mud with her hands. Her fingers closed around a cold, rectangular object. A small metal box, rusted shut. Jace! She screamed. He was beside her in an instant. Together they worked it free from the sucking mud. It was heavy, sealed with a lock that had long since corroded. With the blade of his knife, Jace pried the lid open. Inside, nestled in what was once felt lining, was a leather-bound journal and a single tarnished silver medallion bearing the insignia of a U.S. Army officer. Jace stared at the box, his face pale in the flashes of lightning. "My brothers," he whispered, his voice choked with a grief so raw it stunned her. This was my brother's. He had been here, years ago. Jace's brother had been on this very land, and he had buried this box. Why? Before either of them could process the discovery, a sound cut through the storm. It wasn't thunder, it was the sharp, unmistakable crack of a rifle shot. A bullet slammed into the mud just inches from Hannah's head. They weren't coming. They were already here. The storm was their camouflage, the rising river their cage, and she and Jace were trapped inside it with them. "Get to the house!" Jace roared, shoving the box into her hands. He drew the long knife from his belt, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the rain-swept yard. "Go! Now!" Hannah scrambled back toward the cabin, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Jace wasn't following. He was moving away from the house, a shadow against the storm, deliberately drawing their fire, leading the fight away from her. She slammed the cabin door shut, her back sliding down the rough wood until she hit the floor. Her hands were shaking, covered in mud. The metal box felt cold and heavy in her lap, a ghost from the past, unearthed in the middle of a nightmare. Another shot rang out, closer this time, splintering the wood of the window frame. They were surrounding the cabin. She crawled to the hearth, her hand reaching for the Winchester. Her fear was a cold, metallic taste in her mouth, but underneath it, something else was burning. Rage. This was her home, her land, and these men, Keeley and his hired guns, were trying to wash it all away. She chambered around, the sound loud and final in the small room. She looked down at the box in her lap. The answers were in there. The truth about Willow Creek. The reason Jace was here. The reason his brother had buried his secrets in her soil. Outside, the storm raged. Jace was out there, fighting for her. And inside, Hannah Lee, the quiet woman who had never known anything but solitude, prepared for war. The fear was still there, but it had a new edge. It was the fear not of a victim, but of a defender. She opened the journal. The ink was faded, the pages water-damaged, but the handwriting was clear. She read the first line, and the whole world shifted. "My brother is a good man," it began, "but he is about to make a terrible mistake. He thinks he can save them. I pray he is right. But Captain Keeley is not a man to be crossed. Captain Keeley, Tom Keeley's father. The story of Willow Creek wasn't what she thought. It was so much worse. The journal told a story that made Hannah's blood run cold. Jace and his younger brother Nolan were scouts for a unit commanded by a man named Captain Marcus Keeley. They were tracking a band of Apaches who had supposedly raided a settlement. But Nolan discovered the truth. The Apaches were peaceful, and the raid was a lie, a pretext invented by Captain Keeley. The land the Apaches lived on, a place called Willow Creek, was rich with silver. Keeley planned to massacre the entire encampment, men, women, and children, and seize the land and the silver for himself. Jace, upon learning the truth, refused to be a part of it. He broke ranks, riding ahead to warn the Apache encampment, giving them a chance to flee. Nolan, though he knew it was wrong, was terrified of the captain's wrath and tried to stop Jace. In the ensuing confusion, as Keeley's troops descended on the now empty camp, Nolan was caught in the crossfire and killed. Captain Keeley, furious at being thwarted, branded Jace a traitor and put a price on his head to ensure his silence. He claimed Jace had led his troops into an ambush that killed Nolan and other soldiers. It was all a lie to cover up his own greed and murderous intent. And the final entry, scrawled in haste, was a chilling revelation. Nolan had come here, to this specific homestead, because their mother was born on this land. She was not Apache, but she had been raised among them before being taken away. She had told her sons that if they were ever in true danger, they should come to this place, that the land itself would protect them. He had buried the journal and the medallion, proof of Keeley's treachery, here, in the one place he believed would be safe. It wasn't a coincidence that Jace had come here. He was returning to the only sanctuary his family had ever known. A bullet shattered the glass of the window, jolting Hannah back to the present. They were getting closer, emboldened by the storm. She could hear them shouting outside, their voices faint against the wind. She tucked the journal into her dress. This was the proof, the truth. But it would mean nothing if they didn't survive the night. She crept to the window, peering through the splintered frame. She could make out two figures moving toward the barn. Vargas and one of his men, and another two, including Tom Keeley himself, were circling toward the front porch. Where was Jace? For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was gone, that they had gotten him. But then she saw it, a flicker of movement from the roof of the shed, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows. He was above them, waiting. The two men kicked open the barn door and disappeared inside. Hannah's heart leaped into her throat. Her horse was in there, her milk goat. They would kill them without a second thought. Then a dark shape dropped from the shed roof behind Keeley and his man. It was Jace. He moved with a silent, lethal grace that was terrifying to behold. He dispatched Keeley's hired gun with a single brutal motion, a flash of steel in the rain. The man went down without a sound. Keeley spun around, his pistol firing wildly into the dark. Jace was gone, vanished back into the storm. "He's in the yard!" Keeley screamed, his voice thin with panic. "Vargas, get out here!" The two men burst out of the barn, guns drawn, their eyes frantically searching the darkness. Hannah knew she couldn't wait. Jace was outnumbered 3-1. She rested the barrel of the Winchester on the windowsill, took a deep breath to steady her hands, and took aim at the lantern one of the men was holding. She fired. The lantern exploded in a shower of glass and flame. The yard was plunged into darkness, save for the intermittent flashes of lightning. The men cursed, firing blindly into the night. It was the opening Jace needed. He exploded from the darkness behind them, a force of nature as wild as the storm itself. He was no longer the quiet handyman. He was a warrior, his movements fluid and deadly. He used the knife, his fists, the very storm as his weapons. Hannah fired again, aiming not to kill, but to confuse, to distract. Her shots sent Keeley and Vargas diving for cover. She was no soldier, but she was a homesteader. She knew this land, every rock, every dip in the terrain, and she would not let them take it. The fight was a chaotic blur of lightning flashes, muzzle blasts, and desperate shouts. Jace moved like a phantom between them, striking and disappearing. He was a ghost, an avenger born of the storm. Vargas, the professional hunter, was the most dangerous. He was methodical, using the corner of the corral for cover, trying to get a clear shot at Jace. But Jace was always one step ahead. He drew Vargas's fire, then used the sound to pinpoint his location. He emerged from behind the water trough, and for a split second, the two men were face to face in a flash of lightning. Vargas fired, but Jace was already moving, the bullet whining past his ear. He closed the distance in 2 strides, and the fight became a brutal, close-quarter struggle. From the cabin, Hannah saw Keeley. He was scrambling away from the fight, his greed forgotten, replaced by pure terror. He was trying to get to his horse. He was trying to escape. She would not let him. She flung open the cabin door and leveled the Winchester at him. "It's over, Tom," she yelled, her voice carrying over the din. He froze, his eyes wide with shock and fear. He saw her standing there, no longer the timid, lonely woman from town, but a figure of righteous fury, framed by the warm light of her home. "You won't shoot me," he stammered. "You're not a killer." "You tried to kill us," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You tried to steal my land. You let your father's lies ruin an innocent man's life and get his brother killed. Your war ends here." That was when the fight between Jace and Vargas ended. With a final desperate grunt, Vargas fell, Jace's knife finding its mark. Jace stood over him, breathing heavily, the rain washing the blood from his hands. He turned to look at Hannah and Keeley, a silent, deadly protector. Keeley, seeing his last hired gun fall, made a final desperate choice. He raised his pistol, not at Hannah, but at Jace. He never got the shot off. Hannah's Winchester bucked against her shoulder. The shot was deafening. Keeley cried out, clutching his leg as he crumpled to the ground, his pistol falling into the mud. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the rain and Keeley's pathetic whimpering. It was over. As the first light of dawn broke through the retreating storm clouds, another rider approached. Not a bounty hunter, not a neighbor. This man wore the badge of a U.S. Marshal. He had been tracking Vargas, but he had also been quietly reopening the investigation into the Willow Creek affair, spurred by rumors of Captain Keeley's corruption. Hannah, her face smudged with dirt, her dress torn, met him at the gate. She didn't offer a long explanation. She just handed him the journal. The marshal read it right there, standing in the muddy yard, surrounded by the evidence of the night's battle. When he was done, he looked from the wounded Tom Keeley to Jace, who stood silently by the porch. "It seems," the marshal said, his voice grim, "that a great injustice has been done." Jace's name was cleared. The Keeley family's crimes were brought to light. The bounty was revoked, and the lies were finally buried. When the marshal and his deputy led Tom Keeley away, the homestead fell quiet. The air smelled clean, washed by the rain. The rising sun cast a warm glow on the wet earth. Hannah and Jace stood on the porch, watching them go. The storm had passed, both outside and in. She turned to him, the exhaustion of the night hitting her all at once. "You came back," she said softly, "to your family's land." He nodded, his eyes finding hers. "My brother believed this land would keep its secrets safe." He was right. He looked around at the mended fence, the patched roof, the trench that had saved her home. "We both found sanctuary here." The weeks that followed were filled with the quiet work of rebuilding. They repaired the splintered window frame, mended the barn door, and strengthened the fences. But they weren't just rebuilding a homestead. They were building a life. They didn't talk much about the future. They didn't have to. It was there in the easy silence between them, in the way he started building a second room onto the cabin without being asked, in the way she found herself humming as she worked in her garden. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, she reached for his hand, his fingers, calloused and strong, wrapped around hers. "You're not planning on leaving, are you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He turned to her, a slow smile spreading across his face, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed his entire face, chasing away the last of the shadows. "Every sunrise," he said, his voice low and certain, "I'm just glad I stayed." And in the deep, unhurried stillness of the Arizona evening, Hannah knew she was finally home, not just on the land, but with the quiet, steady man beside her. They had weathered the storm together, and what they had built was not something that could ever be washed away. It was anchored by work, by trust, and by a love as wild and resilient as the land itself. If you were on the edge of your seat through Hannah and Jace's incredible story of survival and justice, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. We share powerful stories like this every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. And don't forget to drop a comment below. What part of their fight for freedom hits you the hardest? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.